Hello, this is Danny Raymond, the voice behind Ray's Guide. In science fiction, there is something called the Earth problem. Simply put, it is how do you get the audience focused on other stars and other planets when they are so used to be focused on the Earth. For example, in Star Wars, George Lucas solved the Earth problem before John Williams was allowed to drop the baton. Gene Roddenberry had a similarly succinct Earth problem solution right in the opening of every Star Trek episode.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Earth exists, but it's our job to be as far away from it as possible. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Earth is in the very first episode destroyed by a Vogon constructor fleet to make way for an interstellar bypass. Because, honestly, is there any other way that someone like Arthur Dent would leave Coddington, England, much less the whole Earth? Of course, if your science fiction story is about the Earth being invaded or whatever, then you don't really have an Earth problem. But the kind of science fiction that is based on having a huge universe of possibilities to explore has to have some reason to keep the setting from being too homebound on terra firma. Now, when it comes to science fiction open world games, there's an additional Earth problem. And that is, we know it too well. Give players free flight, and the first thing they will do is fly over their own country and neighborhood. And sure, it doesn't have to look identical, after all it's the future, but it has to look recognizable. Now, if we were speaking about Microsoft Flight Simulator, you can just pull from existing real-world satellite imagery, but that is too specifically current. On the other hand, in Starfield, you can land on the Earth, but if you pick a place where you know there ought to be major mountain ranges and it's the same sand dunes as every place else. Most other games have different approaches. In Elite Dangerous, you can visit Earth, you just can't land on it. In No Man's Sky, it isn't so much Earth as Earth Prime, so it's not sort of actually Earth. CIG has said that for Star Citizen, Earth will be one of the very last planets developed, most likely for the Earth problem, so I suspect that when they get to it, the solution will be expanding on the pattern that we see in Stanton. Of the main landing zone for Earth will be on the Moon, and the public transit will be then Earth-operated set of shuttles to very specific locations on the Earth, while the rest of the Earth will be a no-fly except for very high orbits. Now, one thing, whatever it is, about game lore, about Earth, or really just about anything, is verisimilitude. Verisimilitude is a term used for works of fiction to mean believability in the context of the story. So, for example, in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the Earth being destroyed by a fleet of Vogon constructor ships filled with boneheaded bureaucrats in order to make way for that interstellar bypass is completely believable in the context, because Douglas Adams has skillfully brought you there from the very first words of the story.
Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this, at a distance of roughly 92 million miles, is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that they still think digital watches are a pretty neat idea. This planet has, or rather had, a problem.
So with that background, I am brought to the subject of Starfield and Earth, and whether its solution to the Earth problem works. And unfortunately, there are two stories of what happened to Earth. The second is revealed only very late in the main story quest, so even the vast majority of websites and videos on the subject only mention the official story. So I'll begin with the official story, analyze whether it is believable, and then, in the least spoilery way possible, discuss the revised story you get at the end, whether it actually improves the believability or not. The official story you will get in pieces explained to you by Sarah Morgan in one of the very first main constellation missions on Mars. Also early in the game, the UC Vanguard has a museum that is the first task if you are joining the Vanguard, but also available to visit by anyone. Since it has the more concise version of the official story, I'll just play the clip from the museum.
In 2150, humanity learned the Earth's magnetosphere would collapse sometime in the next half-century, eliminating all life on the planet. Decisive action was required, but the secure transport of an entire civilization would demand a new kind of cooperation, a new kind of courage, and a new kind of union. Thus, in 2159, the United Colonies were formed to make that journey possible. Just 1 year later, the Galileo, the first of the many colony ships, touched down here on Jemison, beginning a new era of human history, the age of the United Colonies.
In that moment, humanity changed forever. Nothing would ever be the same. They must have been scared out of their minds.
You here to enlist? Don't worry, none of this junk is on the exam.
Now, looking at the official story, it is utter bunk. But not only that, the fact that people of the settled system seem to both accept it unquestionably, despite it being utter bunk, and they are quite unperturbed by the loss of billions of lives. Now, before you jump into the comments and say how I just don't understand or how I am to judge Bethesda world building, do a little test. Fly to Earth. Land. Get out of your ship. Bring up your scanner. Use E on the controller or X to place a beacon. Congratulations, you've just repopulated the Earth, the planet where no one can live. But you say the difference is it cannot support huge cities like it used to. Oh, you mean like the game has on Mars, just one planet over, and where we just visited the human city. Why would billions of people with half a century to notice just decide to oh well and die rather than engage in a massive effort to build as many Sidonia-type safe cities on Earth? One Sidonia-style city would take fewer resources and save more people than a colony ship. So Starfield self-contradicts its own lore about whether the Earth was and is uninhabitable. And then, if you do visit the few featured locations on the planet, you are left with the absurdity of not just known mountain ranges being gone, but somehow certain known buildings stand, but none of the major cities surrounding them. There is nothing special in the construction of the Empire State Building or the St. Louis Arch that would have them, and only them, survive. As an architect, I can say I do understand quite a lot about the construction durability of these structures, and there is nothing special about them. But then there is the question of whether it is believable that the disruption of the Earth's magnetic field be a total extermination event. Well, since I said my field is architecture, it would be better to bring in someone whose thing is astrophysics.
And by the way, there's no evidence of extinction when the magnetic field went to zero and then went back up.
Right.
When it flips. There's no. So, because people say, well, the magnetic field's protecting us from the dangerous rays of the sun.
Right.
And maybe, but whatever damage it caused, it's not even a blip in the fossil record. So
nothing to worry about. Take a deep breath. And the fact that you can take a deep breath means that the magnetospheric disruption means neither a loss of atmosphere nor the death of all life, because it has happened multiple times already.
And the fish don't care.
Right.
The fish are underwater. The particles don't hit them ever, right? So they don't care.
Everybody's fine, except Harold.
I include the bit at the end now about Harold and the fishes because fishes mean food source.
He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Harold, we're sorry.
Harold is the fish. What? That is totally a fish name. How did you get the clueless fish named Harold? That is so the name of the clueless fish.
Who got fried when the poles flipped.
That's what you get for trying to use those legs. That you should have stayed in the ocean.
Should have stayed in the ocean, Harold.
And the official story is also sus in what it leaves out. There is no mention of the very fortunate timed invention of the gravity drive, which is crucial to this whole migration story, but also the detail of their being able to go from knowing there was a crisis to launching an interstellar colony ship in 1 year. Really? 0 to launch in 1 year. Do they realize how absurd that is? So then we go from the official story to what is revealed late in the game in the Constellation quest line. And I can sort of understand why they broke it into 2 parts. Because much like how Hitchhiker's Guide had to set up a world where Vogons existed, Starfield has to set your expectations for a world where multiverse hopping existed and where you can meet yourself from another universe. Which, word to the wise, if you ever meet yourself from another universe, don't presume that you should follow their advice. First of all, that despite their traveling from another universe, they aren't smarter than you. They are you. So how could they be? Also, whatever they may know about their universe, they know nothing about how things will work here because here isn't there. Anyway, that is how one scientist learns the secret of the gravity drive, and early tests of early prototypes is what leads to the destruction of the magnetosphere. And then when that is discovered, they do something that is both incredibly stupid and incredibly evil, pressing on with the test despite the huge consequences and then trying to cover it up as an act of God. But if God is being the scapegoat, why don't any of the religions have an answer to the inevitable question about how could God allow these things to happen? So, does the extra late game revelations about the Earth's fate improve the believability of Starfield's Earth problem? Not much. The strange correlation between the global extinction and the invention of the gravity drive is answered, and a little bit of how they built the first colony ship in just 1 year. But it adds this whole global conspiracy to cover up the truth of it. And despite the fact that huge conspiracies are a staple of pop culture, the reality is few of them actually are successful. It's just too likely that somebody will have a crisis of guilt and become the whistleblower. And the more people that are involved, and the greater the consequences, and you don't get more consequential than billions of death, the more someone will deliver the expose. And then there is the likelihood that other smart scientists, like this guy, would figure it out. So, for example, it's the biggest problem with the moon landing is fake conspiracy theory. Tens of thousands of engineers working on the Apollo program would have known that they were working on something that wouldn't work. And more important, the flight of Apollo 11 would be trackable by the Russians on their own antennas. And if the signal of the astronauts on the moon wasn't coming from the moon, then, well, charade over. So Starfield's answer to the Earth problem isn't a very good one at all. Does that invalidate the game? No. It's a relatively easy thing to look past. But doing hard science fiction is, well, hard. You have to worry about the science. And Bethesda is like the author that has done a whole series of fantasy novels and a whole series of post-apocalyptic novels and is now doing their first science fiction novel. You'd expect it to be rough, particularly on the items, like the Earth problem, that are unique to science fiction. For those of you interested in my contest, the secret word is the name of the stupid fish. Fly safe, keep it real, and I'll see you in the verse. This is Danny Raymond for Ray's Guide.
Disappearance. These zealots remain a threat to all who encounter them. Their pacification, a goal of all space.